Good morning. Hope everyone is doing well. Today we're learning Moed Kattan, Daf Hey, and we're starting at the last two words on Daf Daled Amud Beis. Today, of course, we'll have Daf Yomi now. We'll post it, and then every day this week we'll learn either a blot or blot and a half, and it'll be posted early in the morning. I'm going to record early and then post every morning. So tomorrow's Daf will be posted tomorrow morning and v'chulei throughout the entire week. And we'll try to learn enough that Shabbos's Daf will have been learned over the course of the week so that we don't have to miss everything entirely learning together. At least we can learn this way. Okay, here we go. We have a good blot to learn, and we're going to get started now. We said that we're allowed to fix certain things for water during Chol HaMoed. Let's get into this. Chatita is the process of removing rocks. If you look at Rashi, top line, Dibra Maskel Chotatin, Naflut Siroros, at the very base of the pit, there's some rocks there. So you're allowed to remove them. You can remove them in order to let the water flow more smoothly. However, chafirolo, and says the Gemara, let's qualify this rule that you're not allowed to do any digging. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, lo shanu. When do we say that you're not allowed to do the chafira? That's ela she'ein rabim tzrichin lo. That's if everybody has water, great. If the people don't need it, then no problem. Aval rabim tzrichin lo. But if in fact the people do need water, and this is the primary source of water, then afilu chafira mutter. Then even during Chol HaMoed, no problem at all. Grab the shovel. You can dig a new channel in order to let the water flow. Says the Gemara, v'chi rabim tzrichim lahem mishari. Is that correct? That just because there's tzorchei rabim, you're allowed to dig during Chol HaMoed? Chafira that's a tircha. We know that famously from our Mishnah and for the last 3-4 blot, what we've been discussing is that tircha is not allowed. So says the Gemara, this brisa implies otherwise. V'hatanya. I'll say at the outset, this brisa is complicated, and we're going to ask two questions on it and then re-understand the brisa to make sure that it's crystal clear. It says the Gemara, chotatin boros shichenu ma'aros shel yachid. If there's an individual who owns certain types of cisterns, you're allowed to be chotatin. You can remove pits, and if you're remove rocks from those pits, ve'ein tzarich lomar shel rabim. If a yachid can do it, then definitely the rabbim for sure can do it. And now that's on the side of chotatin. Then the brisa adds, ve'ein chofrin boros shichenu ma'aros shel rabim. You're not allowed to dig in order to create boros shichenu ma'aros for the tzibor. And if that's true, that you're not allowed by the rabbim, then all the more so ve'ein tzarich lomar shel yachid. Now, if this brisa is correct, that means that no chafira can be done at all. Yet we said at the top of the page that chofrin is allowed if it is for the tzibor. Says the Gemara, my la b'sherabim tzrichin lahem. Doesn't this whole brisa have as its undercurrent, doesn't it mean that it's for tzorchei rabim, yet we still see that chafir is not allowed? Says the Gemara, no, you misunderstood the brisa. B'she'ein rabim tzrichin lahem. Really, the brisa is not talking about that. Says the Gemara, well, if that's true, if the brisa is not talking about sorech, if it's not talking about a case of need, then that's also probably true in regard to the yachid. But then why is the guy who's doing chatita allowed to remove the stones? There's no tzorech at all. He has plenty of water. He has 10 other canisters of water. He's fine. But you see him picking pebbles. You're not allowed to do that. There at least has to be a tzorech. So if you're going to say that it's b'sherabim ein tzrichin lahem, then therefore we should assume that there's no tzorech for the yachid. And if that's true, she'ein yachid tzorech lem chatita mishari, how could that be mutter that chatita is allowed? It's not. The Tanya, after all, the brisa writes, boros shichenu ma'aros shel yachid, kones and mayim l'sochan, water can be collected in them. Aval lo chotatin v'lo shalfen esit kayim. You're not allowed to do chatita when there's no tzorech. V'shel rabim, but if it's for the masses, then chotatin osan v'shalfen esit kayim. Then you can pull out the rocks and you can fill in any cracks that's in the channel, in the water canal. So we see clearly that the implications of the first brisa is that if it is for no tzorech at all, chatita is mutter. Even for one guy, I'm a regular guy. I have enough water, but I'm just picking pebbles up for fun. I don't need to. I have enough water. The brisa says you're not allowed to do that. So says the Gemara, Ve'elamai. What's the other option? The other option is b'sheyachid tzorech lahem, is that we have a case of a yachid and he does have a need for water. Well, if that's true, then the brisa is difficult to understand in regards to the rabbim, because it should be that by rabim tzrichin lahem that the chafira should be mutter and not aser. Chafira mi aser. How could it be that it's going to be aser? We have another brisa that seems to say that it's mutter. This, our initial brisa that we started with, is causing a lot of problems because the way that it was written left for two implications that were not really spot on with other brisas. We're a quarter of the way down, says the brisa of Hatanya. After all, we know that digging, when it's being done during Chol HaMoed for the rabbim, is mutter. V'Hatanya, boros shichenu ma'aros shel yachid, So this part is talking about a yachid. Aval, in regards to this yachid, you're not allowed to fill in cracks of the water canal. You're not allowed to remove rocks, and you're not allowed to line it with some type of line. But v'shal rabim chofer nosan v'sad nosan b'sid, we see black on white in this brisa that you are allowed to dig. So says the Gemara, you're absolutely right. And I know that these questions are a little bit subtle. The reason why the Gemara is having a hard time here is because the first brisa was not written cleanly. And the Gemara picks up on this now, a third of the way down. This first brisa was difficult, and we're gonna explain it away. Taritzachi, this is the right way to understand that brisa. If we read this brisa clearly, we will have a lot of clarity on what's going on. Chotetin boros shel yachid. We are allowed to have, as a yachid, I'm allowed to clear out all the rocks that are preventing the water from flowing through the water canal. When is that? When that's my water source. All the more so, all the more so for sure, if it's needed for the people, because when it comes to people who are, when it's for the people and there's a need, you can even dig a new water canal, no problem. Ve'in chofrin boros, you're not allowed to dig for boros shichnum aros shel rabim b'she'ein rabim tzrichin lahem. When people don't need a new water canal, you can't dig, not a canal, a cistern. You're not allowed to dig new water pits when there's no need for them. And if it's a case of no need, ve'in tzarech lomar shel yachid, that dechi ein yachid tzarech lahem afilu chatita nami asur. And this brisa clears up all of the questions, makes all of the smaller brises that we saw afterwards fit perfectly. We have very clear parameters in this brisa. And in fact, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Ashi mas nisan nami deka, halfway down, 6 lines before the wide lines, Rav Ashi says that our Mishnah is also maduyak like this. Diktani osin kol tzorchei rabim. Our Mishnah has the language of kol tzorchei rabim. Whenever we see the word kol in a Mishnah, almost every time, we're going to ask this question: kol la'asu yemai. You are being sweeping in your comment. Everything. Well, what does everything mean? What's kol? What is it? What were you including in kol? Doesn't that come to teach you that tzorchei rabim means that you're allowed to dig a new canal, a new channel for water when it's the needs of the people? Says the Gemara, maybe not. Maybe that's not what osin kol tzorchei rabim means. And maybe our Mishnah is not much of a raya to this new reading of the brisa. Lo la'asuye hadatanya. Really, the language of hakol. Osin kol tzorchei rabim was to teach us the following: Yotzin likvots es hadrachim. Likvots, coats is a thorn. So likvots es hadrachim is to dethorn an area where you're walking. So let's say you have an overgrowth of a thorn bush. So then it's the responsibility of the community to go get a chainsaw or whatever we use to cut thorns. I don't know what people use to cut thorns, and make sure that it's safe to walk. Ulesakin is archovos, to fill in all the potholes. V'es ha'istar taos, which is the marketplace, to make sure that it's all fit for the public. Ulamodas ha'mikvos, to make sure that you measure the mikvos so that all the mikvos are kosher. V'chol mikvah she'ein bo arba'im, so any mikvah that's falling short of its numbers, margilim l'soch arba'im. So we direct water into that mikvah to make sure it has the right amount. If you don't do these things and correct these things, that any blood that spills in those places, in other words, any errors that are made because the city didn't do their thing and on Chol HaMoed they didn't clean up, so then that's as if they killed someone. So therefore the city is obligated to do these things. So what the Gemara is saying is that when it says in our Mishnah that we do hakol letzorech, what was the language of the Mishnah? Osin kol tzorchei rabim. So no, it's not about digging. It's about fixing up the roads. All of those can be done during Chol HaMoed. Says the Gemara, that makes no sense, because when we say hakol la'asu yemai, it means that something's not written in the Mishnah. We're trying to infer, what does the word kol mean? But all of those things are written. All of those things are written in the Mishnah. We talked in Sadrachim. It can't be that hakol la'asu yemai, that when the Mishnah says osin kol tzorchei rabim, that the things are all written in the Mishnah. By definition, it shouldn't be written in a Mishnah. And therefore, osin kol tzorchei rabim la'asu yemai, we can't accept that answer. We go back to where we started. Lav la'asu chafira shma mina. If we were poskim, which we're not, we would say that you can do chafira on Chol HaMoed as long as it's l'tzorech, and you can't even do chatita, the removing of pebbles on Chol HaMoed, even if it's fun for you. But if there's no point in doing it, if there's no tzorech, then you're not allowed. Again, as we've been saying over the last couple of days, we are very gently trying to come up with this definition of what tircha is. You can remove pebbles, but only if it's l'tzorech. Otherwise, it's a tircha. You're allowed to dig if it's l'tzorach, but for the rabbim and not for all of these very gentle nuances, all trying to define what is considered to be a tircha on Chol HaMoed.
Now, does a rabbin mean you and your friend, or
It's a tzibur. It's something that feeds many families. It's like a water canal. We're not used to that. The way our water system is so sophisticated relative to theirs, it's no comparison. All right, 2/3 of the way down, 4 lines into the wide lines. We're going to speak about this until the end of the day today, 25 minutes until Shacharis. That we have an obligation to create a line of demarcation of where a kever is. Now, obviously, a lot of this has to do with kahuna, because a Kohen is not allowed to become tamei. So in many of the, certainly in the non-Jewish cemeteries, but even in some Jewish cemeteries of old, the bodies weren't buried low enough in the ground, so they moved, and like you have on top you have the tombstone, but the mace is like off to the side over all the years, whatever's left of the mace. So we have an obligation as Jews to be mitzayin es hakvaros, and you're allowed to do this even. You're allowed to do this even in Chol HaMoed. Tosfos on the first page said the reason that was true is because it's not a tircha. Let's learn some of the halachos. Amar Reb Shimon ben Pazi. Rebbe's L'tzion Kvaros Min HaTorah Min 9. What is a hint from the Torah that we are obligated to place a remez, to write that or to show in some way that someone is buried here? Talmud Lomar, we're going to have 7 answers to this question as to how we know we're supposed to create some type of demarcation to know that a person is buried there. Talmud Lomar, answer number 1. Okay, you have to build a tzion. You have to build something that lets us know what's going on, that there's a mace there. On this one, there's a question on answer number 1. You want to know what the source? Who said this before Yechezkel? What's the pasuk in Chumash? It's only a pasuk from Sefer Yechezkel. So before Yechezkel, man amra. Says the Gemara, if every time we see a pasuk in Yechezkel, you need to match it to a pasuk in Chumash, that's a problem. We have one halacha that we're about to learn that we didn't learn it from Moshe, but we did learn it from Yechezkel. What is that? Kol ben nechar orel lev orel basar lo yavo el mikdashi l'sharseni. The halacha is that if you have a kohen who's an orel, he's not allowed to do the avoda. That is not in Chumash. That is found in Yechezkel. That's found in Yechezkel. That's not found anywhere else. So Mekamed Delesi Yechezkel Manomra, you're going to ask the same question over there. It doesn't mean it's not a din d'oraisa just because you can't find a pasuk in Chumash. It is a tradition, and the tradition is that Kohen, who's an Orel, is not allowed to. He's not allowed to do the avoda. That's a place to open up shop once the Beis HaMikdash opens. I'm going to open a bris milah store right next to the Beis HaMikdash. Anybody needs a procedure, go. I'll take care of you, especially if you're a Kohen, you get a discount. So the Gemara says we don't have a pasuk for that in Chumash. We have only a pasuk in Yechezkel. So Hachanami, don't ask me for a pasuk about how we know that we're supposed to mark where the graves are. So that's answer number 1, is that we have a tradition that's quoted through Yechezkel, but it seemingly is a din d'oraisa in some way, shape, and form. At least it seems that way. That we are obligated to mark a grave. Next, 12 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Abba Amar Behacha v'tamei tamei yikra, from the pasuk that says these words: Tuma kora alo ve'omeres lo prosh. A person should say about themselves that they're tamei, and you should separate from them, talking about someone who has tzaras. So here, this is true of a mace as well. We have to make sure that we know where the mace is. V'chein, and with a very similar approach, Amar Rabbi Uziel bar Barei de Rabbi Uziel Rabba, Tuma kora alo ve'omeres lo prosh, same pasuk. Says the Gemara, that's not what that pasuk is for. That pasuk of a tamei tamei yikra is not to teach us about the burial plot of someone that we have to mark a grave. That pasuk is needed for something else. With tamei tamei yikra, when a person has a tzaras, they have to tell people about it. And he'll tell everyone, I made a mistake. I have tzaras. I spoke lashon hara. I need you to help me. Then people will daven for him. And if Im Kain, says the Gemara, if you think that pasuk was only to teach us that the guy who has tzaras has to walk around with a sign over his head saying, I spoke lashon hara. Just say the word tamei once. What about the fact, okay, shamas minatarti, I can learn 2 things from it. So therefore, the words v'tamei tamei yikra teach me 2 things. It teaches me that a person who has tzaras has to walk around with a sign saying, hi, that's me, my mistake, please daven for me. And the second word tamei comes to teach us that we have to mark graves to make sure that people know where not to step. Third answer of how we know that we're supposed to mark graves. Abai Amar Mehacha, wow, that's pretty glad. That's a seemingly, if we read this correctly, to not put a mark on a grave, it might be an Isser D'oraisa. Not because of the not putting on the grave, but because a Kohen may walk over that, and that's your fault, and you just help them to become tummy. So this is a shaila Maseches Avodah Zarah. The Gemara there discusses what are the parameters of lifnei lo seitin michshol, if they would have done it on their own, with or without you. It depends where the person's buried. The whole bunch of, so the Gemara gives a bunch of examples over there. One of the examples given is giving wine to a nazir and giving Aver Minachai to a goy. It's one of the examples in the Gemara. Aver Minachai to a goy. They have an Isser. That's one of the Shev Mitzvos B'nai Noach. The Aleph is Aver Minachai. So you give it to a guy that's an Isser Doraisa. That's unbelievable. So it says the Gemara here too. It might be violating by not putting up the appropriate demarcation that this is a grape. Fourth answer. 7 lines from the bottom. We have to make sure that the pathways are clear. Reb Chanina, answer number 5. Oh, no, we're up to now. Reb Chanina Amar, Harimu Michshol Miderach Ami, remove stumbling blocks from my people. Rabbi Shubred, Rabbi Idi Amar, Vodato Lahem Es Haderach Asher Yelchu Ba, the path that they're allowed to go on, meaning we have to know where the graves are. Marzucha Amar Behizartem, Es Bnei Yisrael Mitumasam. The word Behizartem, Rashi writes this 12 lines from the bottom, or so Behizartem, that Umetargim Minan Vesifrishun. One should separate themselves from. And we have this by a nazir. We have similar language. So therefore, we should make sure people know where not to step. We have to do a protection of the truma. How do we protect truma? By knowing where the graves are, because if it becomes tummy, then it has to be burnt. So therefore, we have to know where the graves are. Last answer, 4 lines from the bottom. Ravina Amar, v'sam derech arenu b'yesha elokim. We have to make sure that the pathways are clear. On this pasuk, we're going to have a little bit of a drush. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi called Hasham or Chosav. Anyone who does a good job of evaluating their pathways, they're looking through their life. Is this the right derech to take? How do I do this mitzvah properly? If a person has an evaluation mindset, then you'll be witness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's salvation. Shneimar v'sam derech. Al tikri v'sam derech, ela v'sham derech, erenu b'yesha elokim. We changed the word from v'sam to placement, which is one word, and v'sham, which is to evaluate. So therefore, a person should always evaluate their derech, a constant thinking about, without obsessing, but thinking about the higher quality of constantly elevating ourselves, not just in quantity of what we do, which is one category, but probably even more importantly, is the quality of what we do, and that should be focused on. And the Gemara tells a brief story. Bottom line, there's always that one kid in shiur always asks 1,000 questions. It's beautiful. But the kid has to know when to stop asking questions. So this kid knew when to stop asking questions. The Shabbos of the Rigla, when it was Shabbos that was a holiday, lo hava makshile, he wouldn't ask. Why not? Look at Rashi, bottom Rashi on the page. Why wouldn't he ask a lot of questions? Everybody showed up for shiur when it came to those holidays. The makshile, if the student would ask a question, lo hava matzile fruke, and the Rebbe wouldn't know an answer, have a michsif. It would have been embarrassing for the Rebbe. So he had a cup. He knew he was constantly evaluating himself and saying, hey, it's not always right to ask questions. You got to know how and when to ask your questions. That brings us to the top of Daf Yomi Beis, where the Rebbe responds in Karele V'Sam Derech Arenu B'Yesha Elokim. He said about him these wonderful words that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will witness the Yeshua of Hashem. Says the Gemara Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have taught us in Mitzayin lo al Kazayis min Hameis v'lo al Etzem Kiseora v'lo al Davar she'eno mitame b'ohel. We are obligated, yes, we are in general obligated to put up a tzion to mark graves. However, we are not obligated when the amount of the flesh of the body is a Kazayis, or smaller, and not for an etzem kiseora, not for a bone that's the size of a pearl of barley, and on something that wouldn't otherwise create tumas ohel. In other words, the whole point of the tziyun, as we've been discussing, is for tumas ohel. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. So that's why we are obligated to do so. Aval, even though for those things we are not required to have a tziyun, aval mitzayin ala shedra ve'ala gulgolas, we are obligated to put a tziyun if there is a spine of the skeleton or the skull of the skeleton. I'll rove minyan on the majority of the skeleton, or I'll rove minyan hames, or the majority of the bones of a skeleton if it's only by number and even if not by volume. And as well, ve'ein mitzayin ala vados, when it's crystal clear what's going on, you have the tomb of the unknown soldiers. Everybody knows there's bones there because we know exactly where it is. So then therefore everybody knows, like if there's like a dead person lying on the street, you don't need a tziyun. You should bury the person, but you don't need the tziyun because it's clear. That's a vadai. But one is obligated to be mitzayin. They are obligated to put up a very clear reference as to where a person is in regards to their tumah status. If the person is a suffix, what are the cases of suffix? We'll go through all of them. These are the cases of suffix that do require marking the graves. Sechachos are branches. Piros are rock protrusions, and a beis apras. A beis apras is where we know that a body is buried somewhere in a field, we just don't know where. Then the brisa continues. Ve'ein ma'amidin siyun b'makom tuma. You should not put the actual mark in the center of the grave where by definition, if you walk to that center point, you're going to become tamei. You have to create a little bit of a barrier around the mace so that you don't accidentally step. Doesn't help. If you just put like a flag that says here lies so-and-so, that's not helpful. We don't know what that means. It's too overly specific. It doesn't help us. We need a little bit more space.
Is that why when you bury a mace, you're supposed to outline after all the soil is in, you're supposed to like make an outline?
It could be. I don't know. I don't know how they work Lamaisa. I don't know who's, but most of the basic floors they're not standing like that.
They're not, but when you bury them, you'll see someone go around with a shovel and usually just make an outline out of the mace, out of where the burial ground is after everything's buried.
Like the rectangle.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't even know they did that. I wasn't not familiar. It could be because we have to know where it is. And why is, okay, so that was one din that vein mamid and sin b'makom tuma, that we have to not such a narrow definition of marking the grave, shalom lahafsid sataros, because we don't want to end up burning something that's tahor for no reason. And as well, you don't add like triple the size. You don't like say it's a huge plot of land for one mace. We also don't want the people in Eretz Yisrael to be like, there's a grave over there, 1 square mile is off limits. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous too. You don't want to be mafsid. You don't want to burn tuma because you walked into this fake space. Just to mark the grave. Just mark the grave. The body's only so big. How tall are people? 6, 7 feet, whatever it is. It's not that tall. Okay, and then now we're going to ask a whole host of questions, and then we're going to wrap up at the top of Vav Aleph. Here's question number 1 on this brisa. What a strange thing. If there's a kazayas of flesh that doesn't cause tumas mace, yes, it does. That's what the brisa says. Of course, kazayas mina mace is going to cause for tumas ohel, and of course we should have been concerned about that. Why did the brisa above say that tumas mace doesn't apply to a kazayas mina mace? So Amar Papa hacha bekazayas mitzumsam askinan. It is the perfect amount of flesh. It is exactly a kazayas. So because it's exactly a kazayas, and tisof mechsar chaser, soon enough, by end of day, it's going to end up shriveling even to a minor degree and therefore be less than a kazayas, because right now it's exactly a kazayas and tomorrow it won't be. Mutav yisrifu alav truma v'kachim lefisha. It's better that, okay, somebody makes a mistake and today we didn't put a line of demarcation and this thing became tamei, the kachim became tamei. We'd rather burn it for today, val yisrifu alav la'olam, knowing full well that it's not going to be a kazayas in a couple of days. So we don't want everyone every time they walk over this with truma to have to burn it. That's ridiculous. By the end of the first day, so I'd rather risk one day than risk eternity for tumas ohel. The elu mihenas goes back to analyzing the brisa.
We discovered in the first, even in the case of today, maybe somebody will actually eat it.
What does that mean?
Meaning that you're afraid it's going to get messed up and they're going to have to burn it. But who says they'll discover that it got messed up if you didn't mark it at all?
That's what the Gemara is saying. I'm okay with ruining it right now. I'm okay with that. So you of course, there would have to be a gilui milsa, right? You'd walk over this thing without a line of demarcation, and all of a sudden somebody says, "Oh, I buried a pound of flesh there," and then they're like, "Okay, I have to burn it." But I'm not putting a marker there, because otherwise, every time somebody walks over there, even in 10 years from now, when that flesh is completely gone, we still are going to be burning truma. So the Gemara makes a shikol and says, I'd rather burn for today instead of burning for eternity. So therefore, we're not going to put a line of demarcation over a pound of flesh, a kazayas of flesh. That's the Gemara's balance. A little strange. Why don't you just say for the next week? I don't know. I don't know how it works. I guess once it goes up, it never comes down. I don't know. So that was the Gemara's concern.
They didn't move it.
What?
They never moved them before. They didn't move graves. So once they were
We'll see today that
we'll
see today that they did move graves. Actually, they had in the middle of a middle city where if a person was moving from one city to another, that they'd stop in the middle of one city called Beis HaBochin.
But once, if you're telling me it's bound and you put a sign up saying this is where so and so lies, and then next week it's gone, you're going to think, okay, the sign came down.
Maybe you're right. That could be. You're right. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems strange to me. I don't like the answer sounds a little. It sounds weak a little bit. Like couldn't come up with a better solution though than like burning taros. I don't know. Just I don't know. Okay, third of the way down. We had mentioned in the Brisa above 3 cases of suffix, sechachos, uperos, and beis hapras. The words beis hapras are missing from the Gemara. Some of them Meforshim added back. It should be here. Let's go through each case. Sechachos are branches. So there's a mace buried under a tree. We don't know under which part of the tree, and it doesn't really matter. Ilan a chal haaretz. In that case, there's an element of suffix of where he is, but we assume that everything under the tree is going to be tumas ohel. Piros, you have rocks protruding from a wall, and we don't know where the person exactly is buried, but avonim piros hayotzos mina geter. Someone's buried under there. That's a case of suffix. What about beis hapras? This is going to be the rest of today's conversation. Beis hapras is a field where someone is buried, but we don't know where they're buried. Kiditznan. If a person were to have been buried in a field and on Nemach, the person didn't know, and they plowed over the field, and now the skeleton is spread all over the field. Harehu ose beis hapras. Then that whole field is treated like a beis hapras. V'kamahu ose. What amount of the field is treated that way? Miloman mea amma. It's about 100 amos, which is the amount of distance that the plow will go. But I don't know how the Gemara determined that, but that's what the Gemara assumes. Ubeis hapras mi metame be'ohel. I don't understand. You gave an example in our Mishnah of a place where, in the Brisa, at the top of the page, that when we have a case of a beis hapras, that al suffix, you have to mark the grave, but that assumes that there's tumas ohel because that's all the tziyun is about. That's all the marking is about. It's tziyun. Ubeis hapras mi metame be'ohel. Halfway down on Ham at Beis, there's no such thing. Beis hapras is not tame be'ohel. Let's say the only way for a Kohen to get to the Beis HaMikdash is to go through someone's field, and it's a Beis HaPras. So the halacha is that you can literally blow the dirt in front of you and just look, and literally it's like, going through a minefield with the right tools. You could just go in front of yourself and just blow the dirt a little bit. I see no bones, I'll take another step. Look, that's not tumas ohel. Because if it was tumas ohel, you couldn't walk over the field. There's a way to circumvent the tuma here by blowing the dirt from in front of you. So that means by definition that there's no tumas ohel in a beis hapras, because blowing the dirt in front of you doesn't get rid of tumas ohel. Obviously, there's no tumas ohel in a beis hapras. And as well, Rabbi Yehuda bar Ami mishmedu ula amar beis hapras shenida ashtar. Not only that, as our Brisa indicated, this was a plowed field. So when you have a beis hapras, a regular classical beis hapras is where a person's buried, but we don't know who it is. In this case, it's even better because, it's not good for the mace, but it's better for halachic purposes because they plowed the field. So now it's not even a beis hapras anymore. There's no problem at all. You could just literally walk straight through the field as a Kohen, because beis hapras shenidash tahor. If you have a beis hapras, a field where a person's buried, and then you plowed that field, then it's tahor mamish. So there's no reason to assume in this case that there's any tumas ohel by a beis hapras. Why then did the Mishnah include it? Let's see. Says the Gemara, Rav Papa lo kasha kan b'sada she'avad b'kever. There are different cases here. In one case, you have a field where someone is buried but is not plowed. The field wasn't plowed. That's the case where we say minafech. Ben kan b'sada shenechrash b'kever. Sorry, let me say that again. Kan b'sadeh she'avad b'kever. One is a case where you have a field where there's a person who's buried, and that is where we need a tziyun. That is where we need to mark that field and say, this field is a beis hapras. That then teaches the Kohen who wants to walk through, you have to blow the dirt from in front of you to make sure you don't walk over a mace. And kan b'sadeh shnechrash b'kever, there you're right. There is no tumah there at all, and no tziyun would be required. Another question that has come up in light of our conversation, 2/3 of the way down. Do we call a field where there was a mace buried there, and then the plow ran over this mace and scattered the bones in the dirt? That's still called a beis hapras. Says the Gemara, yes, it is. In fact, Israel. It's not, as the Mishnah writes, Shlosha beis hapras, and there are 3 types of beis hapras. Sadesh abad b'kever. This is the classical case of a beis hapras, where you have a field where someone is buried, but we don't know where he's buried. The next is v'sadesh nechrash b'kever. The second is a field that's our case, in a raya brura, that a field where there was a mace and it was plowed over by the plow. That's still called a beis hapras. And the third is the sadeh bochen. What's sadeh bochen? My sadeh bochen. Rabbi Shua bar Abba mishmed ula amar sadeh shemaftirin ba mesim. This is, Jeff, what I was telling you before, is that when a person would go from city A to city B, they had like an interim connection city. Mm-hmm. So what they would do is they would make sure that city A would bring the mace over here, and city B would come pick up the mace and bring them to there, so that people didn't have to schlep the whole way. So that's what they would do, and that's called sadeh beis habochen. And says the Gemara, what would happen there? Why is it that a sadeh beis habochen had the din of a beis hapras? If it was only temporary, the mace is there for a couple hours, whatever. They meet, one ambulance backs into the other, or one hearse backs into, then you're done. What's the concern? But time of Mai says the Gemara, 15 lines from the bottom. We were concerned that people were going to be miyayish. They're so emotional. They couldn't even wait for the second car to come, for the second horse and buggy to come, and they left the mace there. And therefore, that field has a halachic status of a beis hapras and requires demarcation. Another question that was learned: we had said above, we made a distinction in the name of Rav Papa that a field that had already been plowed, even if there was a mace buried there, that doesn't require a tziyun. Here the Gemara says that's not true. If you find a field that has a sign on it, and you don't exactly know what's going on, we don't know if it's a regular beis hapras or if it's a beis hapras shenechrash, whether or not it requires a tziyun. So it says the Gemara, if it's an orchard where there are trees, apparently it was the standard that in an orchard that they would plow the fields in order to make the trees grow better. But ein ba'ilanos biyadu she'avad bakever, and then that would be the distinguishing factor. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree with this. Rabbi Yehuda says in this brayso, these are subtle nuances in halacha. We don't mess around with hilchos tuma v'tara by kohanim, and therefore you cannot paskin your own shilas here. You can't look at the trees and say, oh, there's a tree, they must have plowed it, therefore it's necharash, therefore I can walk over it, it's tahor. And you can't make the assumption l'chumra the other way to burn truma because you think that it's a regular beis hapras. So says the Gemara, how do we understand this brayso? Here it was a field, and they saw that tziyun. We can tell the difference between the two cases. In some cases, we are going to say that it was considered nechrash. In other cases, it's not. If there are none, then then for sure we would make the assumption that it's just a regular beis hapras. Says the Gemara, maybe we should be concerned. Maybe what we should say is that even if it was plowed, but this mace wasn't plowed over, in which case the risk of walking through that as a Kohen is much worse. It's not tahor like a plowed field that has a mace in it. It's going to be a problem. That's where we say menafech, he has to blow the dirt in front of him. Why aren't we concerned about that? Where the trees are on the borders, we assume that the mace was buried near the trees. That's what some of the Rishonim here, right? That it's more likely for someone to bury there than anywhere else, and therefore it was most likely plowed. Says the Gemara on the top of Vav Amud Aleph, getting to the end, a few minutes to spare. The Dilma Tuma Migavoy Ilanos Mi Baroi. Maybe it was the other way where it was definitely plowed, and therefore we can assume that it's all tahor. Says the Gemara, no way. And no, it's like a forest. There's ground and there's trees, but everything is it's a mishkababel. There's no reason to assume that it wasn't plowed. We have nothing to we don't know what to assume. Some say ha'amran ein marchikin tzion mimakom tuma shelo lahafsid Eretz Yisrael, that we're going to be makil here and assume that it's plowed, which is a lighter level of tuma, because we can't have the whole country at risk of tumas kohen when we're not for sure when we're not sure about it. What did the line mean when the Brisa said, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ad Sheishem Zaken O Talmud Lefisha Ein HaKol Bekin V'Davar? What does that mean? This is our last line for the day. Amar Abaye Shma Minat Tzur B'mei Rabbana Dika B'Mata. That when you have a shul rabbi, you have a shul leader in the community, they have to know everything about everything. They have to have their ear to the ground. They have to know how the funeral system works. They have to know how the cemeteries work. They have to know how the Chabra Kadisha works. They have to know all of the right people. You have to be a baki in the city. Kol mili demata leha ramya. They need to know everything that's going on. It's one of the responsibilities. So it's great that you can have someone who's a huge Talmid Chacham. It's great, and they can be a posek nifla, but they still need to know some of the political ropes in the community in order to help their congregants navigate the complexities of the community. And here, in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, you needed to know the halachos of Tumah very, very well. You're going to have a percentage of your tzibur, granted a small one, but a percentage of your tzibur that are kohanim. When do they become tamimei? So the CRC published a guide of where you're allowed to drive as a kohen, where the trees that overhang, they tell you what streets not to drive on. So it's very practical for kohanim. And I've driven my nephew down the wrong street before because I'm not a kohen, so I don't think about it. And he was 7 or 8 at the time. He's like, Uncle Phil, you got to turn here. I'm a kohen, and that's the cemetery. I'm like, oh shoot! So I drove on the other side of traffic for like 10 seconds to go around a tree, and then came back, and then I just got off the road entirely. All right, we'll stop right here. And Mir Hashem, recordings posted throughout the week. Have a beautiful week. Wishing you all a beautiful day.